You think you've seen reality TV drama before, but what happened in Moab changed everything. In less than 60 seconds, one calm response flipped the entire power dynamic and exposed truths fans have questioned for years. So, if you're ready for real breakdowns with no filters and all the receipts, hit that subscribe button right now and join the family because we're just getting started. You think you have seen uncomfortable reality television before, but what unfolded in Moab felt different from the very first second because it carried a tension that did not rely on shouting or dramatic music. It relied on silence and expectation. For years, viewers have watched Kody Brown shape the narrative of his family's story, presenting himself as the central voice, the decision maker, the patriarch whose perspective framed every conflict and every resolution. And whether audiences agreed with him or not, there was always a sense that he controlled the rhythm of the room. Conversations often bent around his reactions, and the emotional temperature of any gathering seemed to rise or fall based on his tone. But in Moab, something subtle shifted, and that shift created a moment that longtime viewers instantly recognized as unusual. The setting itself felt symbolic: open landscape, wide skies, natural beauty that contrasted sharply with the emotional complexity sitting at the table. Kody arrived carrying decades of shared history with Christine, history that has played out in front of cameras through seasons of growth, tension, separation, and reinvention. He appeared prepared to assert his version of events, perhaps to remind everyone, including the audience, that he had once been at the center of Christine's life. Yet, standing across from him was David Woolley, a new presence in this evolving chapter. And from the beginning, his energy read differently. He was not there to relitigate the past or to compete for narrative dominance. He was there to coexist, and that intention alone altered the atmosphere. As the conversation began, Kody leaned into familiar patterns, referencing history, speaking about love, framing the dynamic as complex and layered. And when he stated that he did love Christine, the words landed heavily, not because love is controversial, but because of the timing and context. In that instant, viewers could sense layers beneath the surface. Was it closure? Was it nostalgia? Or was it an attempt to reassert relevance in a story that has moved forward? The cameras captured subtle reactions, a pause, a measured breath, a glance that lingered a fraction longer than usual. And in that space, David chose calm over confrontation. Instead of reacting defensively, he responded with composed clarity, and that response reframed the exchange. It signaled that the conversation would not spiral into old habits, and that refusal to escalate became the defining feature of the scene. For nearly 20 seasons, audiences have seen arguments intensify through circular dialogue and emotional repetition. But here, the rhythm broke. The moment did not explode, it settled, and that settling felt powerful. Kody appeared momentarily unsure of how to proceed, as if expecting a different reaction, perhaps pushback, perhaps visible discomfort. But what he encountered was steadiness. The contrast between forward-leaning intensity and relaxed composure became visually symbolic. One figure gesturing to emphasize authority, the other grounded in stillness and security. This difference resonated beyond the table because it represented two approaches to change. One approach seeks to maintain control through narrative framing, while the other embraces transition without needing validation. The Moab meeting was framed as an opportunity for peaceful coexistence, especially for the sake of children and grandchildren, and that framing introduced accountability without accusation. It asked a simple question: can shared space exist without revisiting old hierarchies? Kody questioned why he was present, and that question echoed in a way that felt revealing because it suggested displacement from a role he once defined. When someone who has long identified as the center begins to feel peripheral, the discomfort can surface in subtle ways, and viewers noticed those subtleties. Online discussions quickly analyzed body language, tone, pacing, and word choice. Some interpreted the exchange as a symbolic passing of narrative focus from past to present, while others saw it as an inevitable collision between established authority and emerging independence. David's presence represented stability rooted in the present rather than validation rooted in history, and that distinction shifted leverage. In earlier seasons, power often flowed from control of shared resources, shared decisions, and shared narratives, but independence disrupts that flow. When someone enters a dynamic without needing approval, the usual mechanisms lose influence. The silence following David's calm response felt cinematic because it lingered without background music or raised voices. It invited the audience to sit with the discomfort rather than escape through spectacle. And that invitation created suspense, not about who would shout next, but about what would remain unsaid. The meeting underscored a broader theme about identity and relevance in evolving relationships. As families transition, roles change, and when roles change, narratives must adapt. Kody attempted to contextualize his feelings within a larger philosophical frame, suggesting growth and reflection, yet the delivery carried an undercurrent of defensiveness that viewers could sense. It highlighted the delicate balance between acknowledging history and releasing control. David, on the other hand, anchored his comments in present priorities, emphasizing peace and forward momentum, and that focus subtly redirected the conversation from past grievances to current responsibility. The children were referenced as the central reason for coexistence, and that reference grounded the meeting in shared purpose rather than rivalry. For longtime viewers who have followed milestones, relocations, separations, and reconciliations, this scene felt like a threshold. Thresholds are powerful because they mark transition without fully revealing what lies beyond. And the Moab exchange felt exactly like that doorway moment, where the old script no longer fully applied, yet the new script had not been entirely written. The audience became acutely aware that dynamics were shifting, not through dramatic declarations, but through posture, tone, and restraint. Even the natural environment seemed to amplify the contrast, wide open spaces surrounding a conversation about boundaries and belonging. As the dialogue continued, Kody sought affirmation for his interpretation of events, while David declined to validate that framing, choosing instead to maintain neutrality and clarity. That choice removed the fuel that often drives extended conflict. Without reciprocal escalation, there was no spectacle, only reflection. And reflection can feel more intense than argument because it leaves space for viewers to draw conclusions. The Moab meeting did not resolve decades of complexity, nor did it attempt to rewrite history in a single sitting, but it illuminated how power changes when compliance disappears. It demonstrated that authority sustained by repetition weakens when met with calm boundaries rather than confrontation. The most compelling aspect was not what was shouted, but what was withheld. There was no dramatic exit, no raised voice echoing across the landscape, only a quiet recognition that the dynamic had evolved, and that evolution cannot be reversed through insistence alone. As the cameras lingered, the audience sensed that this was more than a conversation. It was a signal that the narrative's center of gravity might be shifting, and that possibility created suspense that extended beyond the episode itself. Because if one composed response can alter the tone of a decades-long story, what might future gatherings reveal? What happens when holidays, weddings, and milestones bring everyone back into shared spaces under this new balance? Will old habits attempt to resurface, or will boundaries hold firm? The Moab moment planted that question without answering it, and in doing so, it ensured that viewers would continue watching not for spectacle, but for transformation. As the dust from that meeting in Moab settled, what lingered was not a loud argument or a dramatic exit, but a quiet realization that the dynamic many viewers had grown accustomed to was no longer functioning the way it once had. For years, the structure of the Brown family narrative revolved around a single gravitational center, and that center influenced decisions, relocations, reconciliations, and conflicts. But in this particular exchange, the gravitational pull seemed weaker, and that shift was visible in the smallest details. The way Kody searched the room with his eyes, as if expecting reinforcement, the way his tone fluctuated between reflective and defensive, and the way pauses stretched just slightly longer than comfortable, all signaled that he was navigating unfamiliar terrain. David, on the other hand, appeared steady, almost unaffected by the weight of shared history that filled the space, and that steadiness communicated something powerful. It communicated that he did not view the interaction as a competition, but as a conversation about coexistence. That distinction reframed everything, because when one participant disengages from rivalry, the dynamic changes instantly. Kody continued to circle back to his confusion about why he was present, and that question carried symbolic weight. It suggested a struggle with repositioning within a story that had moved forward without him at the center. For someone who had long defined his identity through leadership and influence, the experience of feeling peripheral can be disorienting, and viewers could sense that disorientation beneath the surface. The conversation was described as an opportunity to build a functional relationship for the sake of the children and grandchildren, and that framing introduced a measure of accountability without hostility. It implied that maturity would be demonstrated not through dominance, but through collaboration, and collaboration requires relinquishing control of the narrative spotlight. As the discussion unfolded, there were moments when Kody attempted to contextualize his past decisions within broader philosophical reflections, suggesting growth and awareness, yet the timing of those reflections felt strategic rather than organic, and audiences are perceptive when it comes to tone. The difference between sincere reflection and reactive repositioning can often be detected in delivery and body language, and here the contrast was stark. David did not challenge every statement, nor did he attempt to dissect the past point by point. Instead, he held his ground with measured responses that neither escalated nor validated inconsistencies, and that refusal to engage in circular debate deprived the interaction of the fuel that once sustained extended conflicts. Without dramatic pushback, there was no spectacle, only clarity. And clarity can be more confronting than argument, because it leaves little room for distraction. The silence that followed certain remarks felt intentional, even if unplanned, and that silence allowed viewers to process what was happening in real time. This was not a clash of raised voices. In the end, Moab was not about who talked louder, it was about who stood stronger. And in one quiet moment, the entire narrative shifted forever. If you believe calm confidence will always outshine chaos, make sure you hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because this community is all about real conversations, real insight, and staying ahead of the story together.